Good evening and welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting of February 25th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting is being televised. It will be live on cable tonight, and then you'll be able to watch it on ECAT on demand on your computer or on television. So the first thing that we have tonight is one-day liquor license for ECAT, speaking of ECAT, for an art show in the lobby of 50 Oliver Street, North Easton. If you want to come up, Jason.
All right, my name is Jason Daniels with Easton Community Access Television. So we're requesting the one-day liquor license for our annual art show and art stroll, which takes place on April 6th at 50 Oliver Street. There'll be around 25 artists displaying their work that day. It's from 4 to 7 p.m. The event is free and open to the public. There'll be live music with the Steadfast Guitar Ensemble, as well as a beer, wine tasting and refreshments, and we open it up to stroll over to the backside of 50 Oliver to the Shoveltown Brewery, who's a partner along with the Easton Shoveltown Cultural District.
Okay, great. Excellent. So I've been to that several years now, and for people who haven't been there, it's a great event. It's a lot of fun. Some really amazing artists there, so I would encourage everybody to attend. Anybody have any questions? Comments?
No, it's a great time. Been there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And you're going to be keeping an eye on people that are of age?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, great. Would somebody like to make a motion to issue a one-day beer and wine liquor license for the art show to be held April 6, 2019 in the lobby of 50 Oliver Street from 4 to 7 p.m.?
So moved.
Second?
Craig and Tom, all in favor? Unanimous. Great, thank you. Good luck with the event.
you.
And
Have a
thanks
great
for
event.
hosting
All right,
again.
thank you.
See you then, Jason.
Okay, next up is Simpson Springs, St. Patrick's Day event at the Spring. Anyone here from Simpson Springs? Okay, Simpson Springs has applied for a one-day beer and wine liquor license for a St. Patrick's Day event at the Spring to be held March 16th, 2019 at Simpson Springs, 719 Washington Street, Easton, Mass. from 12 to 4. An Easton Police Department detail is not required for this event. Would somebody like to make a motion?
So moved?
Second?
Tom and Chuck, all in favor? Unanimous. I just realized that I did not say that an Easton Police detail is required for the art event. So
That will be communicated to the
yeah,
applicant.
can we let him know that? But
Sure.
just for the record and for the public, I'm sorry I omitted that when I read this quickly. Okay, next up, Southeast School of Music, Hallapalooza fundraiser at Oaks Ames Memorial Hall. No one is here from that. Shoveltown Brewery has applied for a one-day beer and wine liquor license for a Hallapalooza fundraiser to be held March 29th, 2019 at Oaks Ames Memorial Hall, 3 Barrows Street, Northeastern Mass. from 7:30 to 11 o'clock p.m. One Easton Police Department detail is required for this event.
Make a motion?
Second?
Tom and Craig, all in favor? Unanimous. Great, thank you. Okay, common victualler license transfer. We have an application to transfer a common victualler license from Marawi Incorporated, doing business as White Rose Pantry, to Dessa Deli Corporation, doing business as White Rose Deli, 277 Turnpike Street, Southeastern. Is that you guys? You want to come up?
While the applicant comes up, as the board may recall, you recently approved the transfer of a package store license at this location. This is a transfer of a common vic license associated with the deli inside that is going to be sublet to the new applicant.
And all the departments gave approval for this? or-
They'll need to satisfy pre-opening inspections with new food service permit with the Board of Health prior to opening and obtain a business certificate with the town clerk, but both of those are standard.
And so are you new to the business, or?
Yes, well, we've been working for Joseph for, 15, 16 years, so we're not new to the business, we're just new as owners.
Okay, great. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions for us?
No?
Okay. So if somebody would like to make a motion, including the two conditions that are attached to this?
So moved.
Second?
So that's Craig and Tom, all in favor? Unanimous. Congratulations, good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Continued success.
Thank you.
Next is review and approval of the revised Corey policy.
Sure, thank you, Dottie. So attached to your agenda packet, you'll find a memo from Human Resources Coordinator Mary Southworth that is requesting that the board consider voting to amend your existing Corey policy to effectively take care of some housekeeping to reflect some revisions to the overarching state law regarding Corys. By way of background, Corey is the Criminal Offender Record Information Database. This policy was first adopted by the Selectmen back in August of 2012 with the intent of clearly communicating to employment candidates, certain licensing applicants, volunteers who will be dealing with children, as well as interns, under which circumstances the town would request and obtain a Corey regarding that person. That's not done without that person's consent and acknowledgement. We have standardized forms for that. And as part of best practice, we make conditional offers of employment in Easton and do not run a Corey until that conditional offer has been met. The rationale there is that you find a qualified candidate for a job, make that offer, and at that a conditional offer based on that Corey application. So this revised policy is really just kind of keeping with the revisions. Most significantly really is the transmission of an acknowledgement form by somebody electronically. Obviously, people do a significant amount of their business via email. And so this stipulates that if somebody's going to be signing an acknowledgement form and sending it as a PDF, that they do need to have that signature notarized.
All right, I have some questions.
Sure.
In section 14, it talks about dissemination of the Corey. And I'm just curious as to whom and why would you be disseminating a Corey?
Moment. So that's speaking to what's called a Corey dissemination log. So a Corey is disseminated to us. We are not disseminating it to others. So that information comes from a state database to the town of Easton. Only certain employees are able to request that information. We have Human Resource Coordinator through my office, does that for almost all town employees. Outreach Coordinator, as well as the Police Department. Mary Southworth works with all those folks to make sure that we're doing that in accordance with the state's guidelines. But so what that's saying is that we maintain a log internally for a period of 1 year. This is a practice we already have of what person signed an acknowledgement form, and we take that information from that. The application form's available in this packet. Plug it into a state request system. We get that information back. We just have to keep a log of who requested the Corey information, on what time, for what purpose, whether it was a job applicant, a license manager, something of that nature. And we are required to maintain that information, but it's confidential.
Thank you. Second question is, do you check out-of-state Corys as well? Do you go through the out-of-state process?
I believe that this is the state's criminal database, but I'm not positive. I have not myself run a Corey in some years.
That might be a question to ask.
Sure.
Because sometimes people have a history in another state and come to Massachusetts, and our Corey won't pick up on that.
Okay, thank you.
The last, sorry, one last question. I think it's one last question. Do we routinely do Corys on existing staff after periods of time?
No.
They do it with the Commonwealth. They do actually. I'm not sure how many years in between, but
No, so this is a pre-employment set of pre-employment conditions. I believe under the law before it was amended and clearly stated in this policy, an acknowledgement is good for a period of 1 year, but you can't. My understanding from Labor Council is you cannot just continually request a Corey on an existing employee without authorization moving into the future. You would need that person to acknowledge that
Right,
you're going
right.
to do such a thing.
I think that's what they do with the Commonwealth, is that you sign off on that document, and then they do a
Yeah, so
Corey,
no,
later
we
on.
do not request that existing staff reauthorize us to, I guess, spot check the quarry.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
Good.
Is this just for the town government side, or is this also for the schools? Like, are they mirroring?
I do not know exactly what the school's process is. The school committee and the superintendent are responsible for that, so I could find out for you, but this is for the selectmen's purview, town side of the house.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that some of these things we should probably try to be doing, cross-section so that they're consistent.
Yes, and I wouldn't assume that that is not happening. I'm just not, again, I'm not individually kind of in the weeds of running them, but I can ask Mary. I believe she and business staff in the school administration share best practices. So.
Okay, great. All right, would somebody
Thank
like
you.
to make a motion to accept this draft revised Corey policy?
So moved.
Craig and Chuck, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, great. Next is Economic Development Council update. Stephanie?
Good evening, Stephanie Danielson, the Director of Planning and Economic Development. And I'm here tonight to give an update with Dottie on the activities of the Economic Development Council over the last 2 years. It was 2 years ago, the last time we were in front of you doing an update. Just real quickly, the council was formed in 2014. That means it's been meeting starting this year, almost 5 years. To promote sustainable economic development and collaboratively seek local and regional opportunities for economic growth. Recognize neighborhood and community concerns during economic policy development. I think that's an important aspect of the mission. And to leverage existing infrastructure and facilities, address weaknesses through collaboration with the public, businesses, and other governments. So over the last 2 years, the Economic Development Council has been working on a variety of activities. In the Queeset Commercial District, everyone will recall that in 2015, the Zoning Board brought to town meeting amendments to the zoning in the Queeset Commercial District to spark and promote more economic development and redevelopment in that area. Plus, with the sewer that's going in, the council commissioned McCabe Enterprises to develop an economic development strategic plan. And that plan talks about what the market opportunities are for the area, talks about what residential should look like in the district, and it developed an action plan, an actual plan that we can act on. And on March 7th at 7:30 a.m. at Stonehill, the council will be presenting those findings in a public engagement session to that, the business community, the Queeset business community. During the year, over the last 2 years, the council has been very effective in partnering with Stonehill as a key stakeholder in the district. Bruce Boyer joined the board in 2017 and has been a great asset, and as demonstrated by some of the input that he's had regarding the recommendations of the plan, and also hosting the session, the public outreach session on March 7th. Around the same time as the Betterment Workshop that the Board of Selectmen held, we also did a public input session with members of the district. So again, we invited people in to talk about the investments that the town was making in the district and asked for their input on what their vision was for the future of the district and some of the challenges they felt they were facing.
So just to interject one thing, you know, one of the challenges in doing this kind of public outreach is that some of the businesses are not the landowners, and then there's some residences in there, and so it's very hard to reach everybody one way, you know. So we've sent out letters and postcards and phone calls, and Stephanie's gone out and walked the area, knocked on doors, and invited people. So, you know, I know probably somebody will say, wow, you're having this meeting at 7:30 in the morning as a kickoff. Well, that was deliberate because, you know, a lot of those places are restaurants and businesses. The Chamber of Commerce generally holds their breakfast meetings early, and they get a very good attendance. So that's why we were trying to do it at that time, because we're really hoping that people will come to this, you know, interested members of the public, the businesses especially, and we've invited a lot of stakeholders that, you know, should be the Chambers of Commerce,
Our legislators.
our legislators, Mass DOT, you know, everybody that's going to have an interest in this. So we're really hoping a lot of people come.
Awesome.
The council provided zoning support over the last year, recreational marijuana. They voted in support of that as an economic development tool, and also for the compact neighborhood overlay district for the Foundry site. And again, previously supported the Queeset Commercial District mixed use zoning. In the industrial, as it relates to the industrial park, with town administrator Dottie and I and folks have reached out to Brockton to talk about a tie-in to the sewer for the industrial park. I also conducted some phone surveys, reaching out to the owners of some of the businesses that might be more impacted by growth due to lack of adequate sewer treatment, and received some good responses there on what they'd like to do and how they'd like to grow. In particular, IBC, which isn't right in the industrial park. They are a thriving business. They employ 150 people, and they would like to grow. They think that they have some growth potential. They'd like to stay in Easton in their location, but the sewer tie-in is going to be important for them. And then, you know, I've gone out and met with business owners both in in all the districts as part of canvassing to let people know about some of the events that we've hosted, but also to just talk to people and find out, again, what are their challenges, make sure they know what's going on, what investments the town's making. I talked a little bit about the relationships and outreach. We provided, Dottie and I did an update to the Chamber of Commerce a few months back, where we talked about all the activities that are going on in Easton in our economic development target areas. We've been promoting for the last several years the Buy Local and Manufacturing Day. So again, we're really trying to demonstrate to the business community that Easton is business friendly and is welcoming to businesses. Many of you attended the Five Corners District Visioning Charrette that was held in September. That was a lead-in to both the sewer work and what we're looking for in the future for development in the Five Corners area, but also helped with projecting revenue growth for the DIF district. And some of the general business assistance, we've rolled out the site locator tool. We've had some some landowners have been listing it, and some real estate brokers have been listing their properties that are available for either sale for business activity or for lease. It's something we continue to work on and promote because we think it could get a lot more traction.
So the site locator tool is on the website, on the economic development page. You click
Yes.
on that, it's the map of Easton, and it tells you where the parcels are. And if you click on it, what information comes up on that?
It gives you the site address. It will tell you the zone it's in. You can click on the zone and you'll find out what type of uses are allowed and not allowed. So it gives people a little more information and contact information where that's available. So I mentioned one of the things the council's really interested in is making sure that people understand that Easton is open to new businesses. And you know, back when the council was first formed, the Think Easton video was done and the website, and we've been working on revising the business guides to make them even easier for people to use. So the guide tells people, if you're opening this type of business, here are the steps. Here are the things you might need to do. You might need a business certificate. If you're opening a restaurant, you're going to need to talk to the Board of Health. You might need an alcohol license. So where do you go? Who do you need to talk to? And we've simplified that. We're working on the more detailed guide that really is a step-by-step and trying to redo that. And we've kind of said, why Easton? You know, we want you to think Easton, but we want you to know why. Why is Easton a great place to do business? And we continue to give permitting and business startups guidance on how to do business in town.
When do you give out that guide? Right when they
It's online.
Yeah.
It's available online. And one of the things we're doing, so over the last few months, I've really noticed is we're trying to find the right place to put information for people on the website, that how and where we put things, how people get to that information is really important, and we need to think more like someone who is a business or someone who's looking to start up a business, rather than someone who works in the office and says, oh, where would I go to get that information? And we look at things a little differently. So I've been working with my staff, we've been talking with the Economic Development Council and getting input on how better to organize those pages. So I think that was a little bit of a long answer to your question, but...
No, that's fine. I assume the answer would be it kind of depends, too.
Yeah. Yep.
And we do with the printed brochure when we go to different events, like when we speak at the Chamber of Commerce or things like that, or
Yeah.
you know, the listening sessions, we bring some of those printed copies with us.
Yeah, great, thank you.
You're welcome. On the Think Easton webpage, we started off with a testimonial from Whelan Associates, who opened the medical building up by the Roach Plaza. Had a lot of wonderful things to say about the town after a little bit of intervention when things seemed to be a little bumpy for them. And the testimonial was great. We've added a testimonial from Avalon and just recently added one from Shoveltown Brewery. I particularly like the one from Shoveltown because they talk about their business, so you get an insight as to what brewers are facing, and also talk about working with the town and how welcoming they felt the community was.
And I think sometimes the thing that's the challenge is that, you know, it's like with anything in any business, communication is really the key to the successful onboarding or bringing anybody into town. So in the cases that I know of where, like as Stephanie mentioned, that there might have been a bumpy road, we bring people in right away and try to figure out where's the disconnect. And, you know, people appreciate that because nothing's ever smooth sailing on a very complex issue, especially if it is a big business that has a lot of construction and permitting and things like that. So, and of course, every project that we have lessons learned, so the next one goes a little bit different. But we have a development review team so that when we know that there is a big project coming in, the department heads get together with them before everything starts to give them the heads up on, these are some of the things that you're going to want to be looking at before you go into that. These are the departments you're going to have to meet with, and kind of lay out the expectations in advance, because we want things, and with the online permitting, it's very important for businesses to have the predictable roadmap for them on what they have to do. So I think, you know, the Planning Department and Economic Development Council have done a good job advocating for that.
That's awesome.
So I'm not going to read through this full list, but as you can see, we've had a number of new businesses start up in Easton over the last 2 years. To Dottie's point, I'm going to use Dogstream 2 as an example. We didn't know if their use would be allowed, and they're located at the Shaw's Plaza. Didn't know if that business would be allowed. They were looking for a place. They called me. We'd been talking. We figured it out. I did a little bit of research, got back and said, "This, you can absolutely do that here. This is how this is classified." We worked with them on their signage, and I think that's a really good example. I went to visit to drop off a flyer for the visioning session, and they're doing very well, and really pleased to be there. So,
Excellent.
and again, we have a lot of other great businesses. So many of these are really doing quite well and been well received. In addition to that, we've had a number of business expansions. Not the least of which is Hilliard's House of Candy, which is underway. I will tell you, when they were first talking with us about the expansion, my granddaughter came to the office to visit one day. I had a plan laid out. I needed to keep her occupied. I said, here, look at this plan. And she said, well, what is this? And I explained to her. I said, they want to expand. They want to do this. She said, well, let them. And I said, we want to.
And then it was approved.
Some of the activities for 2019, looking at everything that we've accomplished over the last couple of years, I looked at this and I thought, oh, gee, it looks a little skimpy, but there's a lot of work that's going to go into these efforts over the next year. Supporting the Five Corners DIF, which is really going to be important for the town and for the Five Corners. The getting buy-in from the business community in the economic development strategic plan for the Queeset District. A lot of the action items, many of them are like infrastructure improvements and things that the town needs to take a lead on, but many more are ones that really the business community themselves need to buy into and help engage and move forward. The business community engagement is always ongoing. Really, again, reaching out constantly. It's something I need to remind myself constantly to do. You know, there's so much to do back at the office, but when you're standing there and working in the office and you're like, I need to get out. I need to make an effort to do that outreach. So we try to do that on an ongoing basis. And again, the ongoing Think Easton, Why Easton promotion.
Very good. So I guess something else that's worth mentioning is that when we did the master plan, there were a lot of objectives and actions just specifically for economic development, and we really use that as a very important document that we do go back to. A lot of towns say that they have a master plan and then it sits on the shelf. This really truly is a working document, and the things that we work on, we do pull that out and we refer back to it and see how does this initiative fall in line with what those objectives are. So I think it's important for people to know that we do review that, and it's really given us some pretty good guidance and direction on what the people in the town have already said they wanted to do and they wanted to see in these areas. So
That's a good point. Stephanie, thank you so much, and Dottie, thank you and the team for all of that. I think economic development is so important for us given our revenue challenges that we face. Bringing new business in, being hospitable to business, and trying to develop ways like sewer districts for us to generate meaningful economic development and therefore revenues for the town via new growth. I just think that's so important, and it provides opportunities for people to be successful, whether it's jobs or owning businesses or even within the town for our opportunities to provide services and support schools. So just if I could ask more of it, the more the better. But looking forward to some big projects coming online, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I'd also like to thank the members of the council, because they're all businessmen themselves, and that means they're taking time off from their work, their businesses, and to come to this meeting and find it important to do that and to continue to promote and support the town.
Good point. Great
And
point.
Craig is on the council also, so I appreciate your support and ideas. It's a good group.
It's an excellent group, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Okay. The next is the vote to renew the license agreement with the Easton Chamber of Commerce for the use of the Cape House.
Sure. So this is timely. I believe that one of the one-day alcohol licenses was referencing the Easton Shoveltown Cultural District as one of their partners. As the board is aware, the Shoveltown Cultural District, which was designated by the Mass Cultural Council recently and formed into a formal municipal board and committee by the Selectmen, even more recently, has a license to use some space in the Cape House on the Shovel Works property. They share that space with the Easton Chamber of Commerce. I was surprised to see that 5 years had already passed, and the original license agreement for use of that space, which is basically the upper floor for art exhibition and public access. That license agreement was set to expire at the end of this month, so we reviewed it with all the appropriate attorneys and had insurance take a look at it. And I am requesting, there's a lengthy motion for you, Mr. Barger, that is actually a bit more verbose than some of the motions we use, but this is more for consistency's sake. This is a refresh of a motion originally used back in 2014. Town Council took a look at it and said that it was appropriate. So by way of background, this is an agreement with the Easton Chamber of Commerce, who lease that space from Beacon, and the town, through the Board of Selectmen, agreed to license some of that space. And for consideration, rather than paying rent, we extend a small amount of insurance coverage to that property for public use in the amount of $100,000, which is the limit of any kind of municipal tort exposure and doesn't add any cost to our premium.
Any questions?
Nada.
Great.
Motion that the Town of Easton Board of Selectmen hereby approves the execution and delivery of the license renewal made by and between Easton Chamber of Commerce, Inc. and the town. Board of Selectmen finds that the foregoing document is in the public interest, in the best interest of the town of Easton, authorizes the chairperson of the Board of Selectmen to execute and deliver the license renewal, and authorizes the chairperson of the Board of Selectmen to execute and deliver such other certificates and documents as the chairperson reasonably determines to be necessary or convenient to effectuate the license renewal and the license covenants and promises contemplated thereby. The license renewal shall be subject to such non-material and/or administrative changes as are deemed necessary in the public interest and in the best interest of the town of Easton by the chairperson of the Board of Selectmen.
Second?
All in favor? Unanimous.
Thank you.
That was Craig and Chuck. So next we have back-to-back the town administrator presentation for the community comparison report, and then going right into discussion about the preliminary fiscal year 2020 operating budget.
Sure, thank you for your time. This was actually a presentation that was originally slated for 2 weeks ago. However, that meeting went a little bit longer than I think
In the tape.
than we might have expected. So we tabled this report. We did review the budget together, but I don't know if that was even taped. No, not. So I will try to be as brief as I can be and not go on for too long.
I think we were kind of tired that night, so this will be
First time.
a nice way to look at it again.
Okay, with fresh eyes. So I'm happy to present what is my first community expenditure comparison report as town administrator as part of our ongoing fiscal 2020 budget process. This was intended to be the second and is now the third in a series of reports that I intend to present through this budget process to provide the Selectmen, Finance Committee, School Committee, and the broader community with good financial information during the budget process to inform the decision-making we all take part in. This follows the summary report of financial condition, which I believe was presented in January, as well as the preliminary budget that was presented 2 weeks ago and that we'll touch on again tonight. The community comparison report looks at, it's another comparative assessment tool. This looks more of the expense side of the ledger. The summary report of financial condition looked at revenue and long-term liability metrics. The date is no longer correct, so I thought it'd be clever with past tense up there, but this is a slide that we have been including just to kind of show the length of the annual budget process. It is now the 25th. We're reviewing the community comparison report. That's in the broader backdrop of a long, involved, and public budget process that we take part of every year. Anything up there that you see in green denotes a public meeting or a process. And we're moving, the preliminary budget's already been issued, so we're moving into the kind of budget review and refinement phase, leading up to producing a balanced budget to present to town meeting on May 20th, which will be here before we all know it. So the community comparison report compares expenditure levels for total spending, education spending, general government, police, fire, and public works using the most recently available data from the Department of Revenue, which is fiscal year 2017 data. So you may recall the summary report of financial condition looked at fiscal 18 revenue metrics. On the expense side, the most current information available is fiscal 2017. There are two subgroups that we use in this report as benchmark comparisons. One is a group of what we call throughout the report, which I apologize, I should have mentioned, and it looks like Tom is already into the charts and graphs, but you have a hard copy in front of you for reference. This report, the press is also available online. We have two subgroups. One is 8 core communities, so that's a phrase you see throughout the report. The core communities are communities that are comparable to the town of Easton from a municipal expenditure perspective, looking at certain criteria, similar population, so within 10% one way or another, 90 to 110% of our population, average single-family tax bill, per capita income, and equalized valuation per capita, which is just the per capita value of land. This is the same methodology that was utilized in the Abrahams Group operational audit. It's also a methodology the town has used for internal benchmarking before, so it's consistent. We always add the caveat that we do not purport that any one methodology is the methodology and the only methodology. It's but one of many, but we find that this is a relatively compelling one. Using per capita data like this is pretty commonplace in budgetary and policy analysis, but all of this is publicly available information, so folks are more than able to go on to the Department of Revenue's DLS gateway and kind of poke around and draw their own comparisons.
And also our
A ClearGov
ClearGov.
visual budget, which is up to date through fiscal year 2019. You can get to that by clicking Financial Transparency Center on our website. So we have this kind of comparable group from a statistical perspective, and then we also have another subgroup of just our contiguous neighbors for the sake of having an understanding of what folks in the neighborhood are doing. Although it's not necessarily a scientific comparison, it's still useful to have. So this methodology, first, I kind of already talked through the percentage ranges here, but what this ends up with, outside of the 4 metrics, the 90 to 110% thresholds I just mentioned, we also try to control for some more qualitative things, which are difficult to do with raw data, which we refine comparable communities by eliminating any communities which have fewer than 15,000 or more than 40,000 residents. We try to control for community character by eliminating any comparable communities with population density more than twice that of Easton. So even if you have those other metrics that are close, if you have more than twice the density, that doesn't really have the same feel of a community. So where does that bring us? It gives us 8 core communities. We have Ashland, Canton, Chelmsford, Dedham, Foxborough, Mansfield, Marshfield, and Walpole. Again, this is the same methodology that was used in the audit. And then we have our 5 neighboring towns, excluding Mansfield because they are both a neighboring community and a comp. So from a total spending perspective, before digging into per capita expenditure metrics, Easton's total budget is just above 13.25% smaller than the average total budget of our comparable peers, despite a population that's within 1% of those peers. Our per capita spending is 12.7% less than the per capita spending of our peers. An interesting data point that emerged in doing this report, this is not the first community comparison report that the town has ever done, but it is the first one that has been done in many years, and it's the first one that I have done as town administrator. Since the last time this data was reviewed, which was looking at fiscal year 2014 data, so a 3-year lag, that disparity, the 13.25 in total budget size and the 12.7 on a per capita basis, has actually grown from that last report, which was 11 and 9%. Respectively.
So Tom, what does that mean in terms of numbers? I'll totally put you on the spot. For an $85 million budget, what is the math on?
Right, points 850,000. So 2 points would be 1.7 from 11 to 13. In terms of millions of dollars?
So 2.7 million?
1.7.
1.7 million.
On an $85 million budget, 1% is 850,000, so times 2 is 1.7 million.
That's the increase in disparity. That's not
Right.
the actual
Correct.
disparity itself.
So what could we do with $1.7 million?
A tremendous
Right.
amount.
Wow. Right.
So we're going to get into each kind of department visually, but what the data highlights is that something that we have known to be true here is the town operates with very lean budgets. And looking at the department level spending, it's going to demonstrate that compared to our core communities, Easton ends up ranking in the lower half of per capita spending in every single area that we compare. And frequently, not only is it in the lower half, but it's actually the 25th percentile or below. So total spending per capita, we have the highest spending per capita on the left, moving down towards the right. I probably should have made those numbers a little bigger, I apologize, but again, they're in your report. Our total spending per capita is beneath both the median and mean per capita spending for both our core communities and neighboring communities. So on all of these graphs that you're going to see here moving forward, blue columns represent our comparable core communities, and yellow, sort of pale vanilla actually, represents our neighboring towns. Easton is the green bar. So again, we rank below the median and mean per capita spending for both our core communities and our neighboring communities. We rank last of those 9, that core group of 9. If you look at our comps plus us, we're last in total spending per capita. We're 4th of 6 in the bordering towns. We trail West Bridgewater and Sharon by more than $1,000 per capita per person.
Connor, if I may, what effect does the industrial base have on this kind of, on the appearance of this? Meaning, if I look to the left, I see things like Sharon and Dedham and Foxborough on Route 1 and Foxborough with the football stadium, and Canton has a much larger industrial area than we do.
Sure.
Does that have some effect on what happens here in that we're
Well,
right there?
the split of residential versus commercial tax base has an impact on the, often on the tax rate. So we actually had a supplemental data sheet that budget subcommittee is kicking around that looks at that question a little bit more because it's a good one. And what you see is often communities who have more than 20% of their taxable property or commercial frequently have a split tax rate. Easton does not. Easton's at about 13%. And we do not have a split tax rate. If we were to split the tax rate, that doesn't change the levy. So while that may have an impact on the tax bill, because typically when you have a split rate, the commercial tax rate is higher per $1,000 of value than the residential one. But your levy is your levy. So having that split rate redistributes from where that tax revenue is collected, but it doesn't have the same effect as, say, an override where you increase the levy permanently just by virtue of splitting a rate. I hope that's helpful and not overly.
Good, thank
So
you.
just to define the levy for people at home that might not know what that is,
Sure.
that's the 2.5%.
Sure. Yeah. So the levy is basically the total amount of tax, and the finance director's in the room and is going to interrupt me if I'm start getting out of my wheelhouse here. But it is the total amount of tax revenue that is to be collected by a municipality in a given year. And there are a variety of factors that influence people's tax bills, because something that frequently comes up when we look at these I usually don't get all the way to the end before someone says, well, wait a minute, our average tax bill's over $7,000. How can that be true while we simultaneously are spending less? And there's a variety of factors that impact that, but the rate impacts the tax bill. But you have a levy, which can only go up year over year by 2.5% plus new growth, which is why new growth is so important. It permanently adds to that tax levy, and is really the only way to add to that outside of it in override. So you have the levy in a given year, which is a total you can collect. Going into a new year, you have 2.5% of that new growth. You get a new levy. You have that amount, and it gets divided up. It's basically a formula. It gets divided up by the value of all property in a community. So that's what the assessors do, is they look at and assess, they certify the assessed value of property on an annual basis. You get that number, which is in the billions, I don't know it off the top of my head. and divide the levy by that, and that gives you your tax rate. That's how you get this very complex formula that yields at the end of the day, you get a tax rate. So in Easton recently, our tax rate dropped from $16, I think 20-ish cents per $1,000 of value, down into the 1590s. Yet a lot of people saw their tax bill go up. And people say, well, how is it if ever rate goes down, my bill goes up? Well, because the value of property in Easton is high and is increasing.
So it's kind of a double-edged sword because, yay, our property values are high, and if we want to sell our house, it's good, and it's good that our investment is appreciating, but, you know, it's not always welcome to get an increase in your taxes. You just have to look at it that that's part of your investment in the town, and if you're happy with the services that you get, you know, you have to balance that out, but it's a lot of questions happen around that every year.
So moving into department-specific expenditures, if you look at education, and I'll repeat my caveat, particularly with education, there are other metrics that you can look at. Oftentimes people will look at per pupil expenditure. This is per capita, solely for the purposes of consistency with the other departments. Excuse me. So Easton per capita spending for education, which is $1,667 per capita, ranks 7 of 9 core communities. It fares better when compared to our neighboring towns. We rank 2nd out of 6, placing 8th overall out of that 14, the larger group. It's worth noting that while this category is still below the 50th percentile per capita spending, it is worth noting that even though we do have that kind of comparative benefit compared to our neighbors, it's still below the halfway mark. Dottie, you had put Tom on the spot on, you know, what does 2 points on this look like throughout the report. I thought that was a useful analysis. And so if Easton were to spend on education at the average rate of our core group, the fiscal 17 budget would have needed to have 1.9 million in additional education spending to bring up the per capita education spending to be the average of this group. Looking at total government, general government, so that's, you know, things like town hall operations. That is Easton's lowest among comparable communities. We rank last in per capita spending amongst our comparable peers at $102.56. That's 42% below the core group average per capita spending, which is $177. When you include neighboring towns, Easton ranks 2nd to last in per capita spending in this area. If we were to equal our general government spending of our neighbors based on their average per capita spending, we would need to increase our general government budget by just shy of 1.8 million, which is almost double. Our general government budget is, I think, in the area of 2 million, but there would be an increase of 73%. Could do quite a lot with that. We don't have a building big enough to put a budget like that, but it's quite a large difference. Here it is, 2.25 million. That is our general government spending in fiscal 17. So to be at that comparable per capita spending, that would have needed to increase to almost 4 million. This is an area that, like the introductory of this, when I reference the disparity on a total spend level has grown, that is the same, particularly in this category. The disparity in general government spending compared to that of our peers has grown since the last report in fiscal 14. At that time, the delta was 1.2 million if we were to spend at the rate of our peers, and now that is 1.77. Police expenditures per capita spending for the police in Easton is $172.24. That ranks last of our 9 core communities, 17% below the core community average. This position has slipped from the last report in fiscal 14 from rank 7 of 11 core communities down to 9 of 9. When compared with a larger group, Easton's per capita spending for police ranks 13 out of 14. It's 5th of the 6 bordering communities. If Easton were to spend at the rate of our core group, we would have needed to have added approximately $700,000 to our fiscal 17 police budget. It's worth noting that since the budget year that this data covers, we did add 2 officers to the police department budget in fiscal 2018, which would build that per capita spend up a small amount. So we have made some progress in that area since this data was captured.
I would think Foxborough's would be higher, and West Bridgewater's and Raynham are really kind of outliers on that.
They appear to be. I also am admittedly not the budget director, and I haven't dug into their individual operating budgets to see what those idiosyncrasies are, but it could be worth looking at. Per capita expenditures for fire. Easton's fiscal 17 per capita fire expenditures are $156.74 per person. That ranks last of our neighbors and 6th of the 9 core communities, 11th overall in this 14-peer group. The per capita spending in this area is 12% lower than our peers. Again, in fiscal 17, if Easton were to spend at a rate of our core group at that time, it would have needed to add approximately $500,000 to our fire budget. It, again, is worth noting that since this data was captured in fiscal 17, the town was fortunately the recipient of the federal SAFER grant, which is the federal staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grant. In fiscal 18, that allowed the town to hire 4 additional firefighters with a staggered grant program that at first required the town to pay for effectively the cost of 1 and get 4. So again, as time goes on, the town will absorb more of that into our budget, and that will pull the fire expenditures per average spending up slightly as well. Public Works. The Public Works Department spends $135.58 per capita, again, fiscal 17, ranks 7 of the 9 core groups, 5th of 6 among neighbors, and 11th out of a total group of 14. Spending in this area is 27% below that of our peer group average. Were Easton to spend at a rate of our peers in this category to match their per capita spending, we would need to add $1.2 million to fiscal 17 Public Works budget. Reserves are not an expenditure. This was something that's a carryover from the other report, but we felt that it was nonetheless beneficial to include. The DOR data includes all reserve funds, so that's free cash and stabilization funds, including capital stabilization funds. So typically when we look at our reserve ratio, we don't count our capital stabilization funds because while those are, of course, dollars that the town has access to, they are in a specialized capital stabilization account for a reason, and that's usually for something like a sewer account or a capital budget account.
Or like the Avalon
Right,
mitigation would be
right. That mitigation is in, it's actually in both of those accounts that I just mentioned.
And that's, you didn't take that out, even with that, we're that low?
Correct.
Wow.
On a per capita basis, we're second from last among our neighbors. We fare slightly better compared to our peers, ranking 7 of 9th. Obviously, we've spent a great amount of time and I think effort talking about and working to address our reserve position as a group and as a community. And we're going to continue, obviously, in light of a challenged reserve position, to keep working with what we have. We have the structural revenue deficit. We're trying to build up our stabilization fund. We have been successful in that area. We've added over $1 million to the stabilization account the past year and a half, and work needs to continue in that front. So this is a summary slide that visualizes like the meta-analysis of all those graphs we just looked at. I just kind of popped off a few different, we're X% below in this area, Y% below in this area. This shows, and I think it's a helpful visual representation, what the percent variation we are from the average per capita spending across the board is. So again, blue, that's our core group. And so from left to right, you have total spending, education, general government, police, fire, DPW, and where our reserves stand. And that shows the deviation that we have on our average spending levels compared to our peers and our neighbors. So in summary, this data bears out, the realities here. We have talked a lot about how, I think to borrow language from the school department, there's reactive budgeting. We look at revenue first and then back a budget in to live within those means. That necessarily results in very lean budgets. We've been reducing those budgets on the margins year over year to try and produce a balanced budget within the confines of Prop 2.5 and a 13-year-old structural revenue deficit. And our spending level reflects that. Again, these are the communities that were picked by the operational audit methodology. This is not just an in-house thing that I picked arbitrarily. It reflects cautious and responsible and professional budgeting by all of our departments. That has been the norm since the Great Recession. And it's important to note that lean budgets are not necessarily indicative of underfunded or operations that are not doing a good job. I think we do a remarkable job with the resources we have in Easton. We pride ourselves on that. So those things can be related. Of course, additional funding is helpful for providing improved and additional services. But I do not want the takeaway from this to necessarily be, well, our general government spends 42% less per capita than our peers, so we're delivering 42% less general government services, because it's not that direct. So some key takeaways here. Our budgets are extremely lean. We've talked about that a lot over the years. It's important, on the flip side of the somewhat positive note of me saying that lean budgets do not necessarily denote that we are underfunding things. It is clear that with how lean these budgets are, adding programs and doing dramatic service improvements within our current revenue levels is not really possible. Relatively speaking, there is less disparity in spending on education on a per capita basis, but again, even there, that's below the 50th percentile. And our reserve position remains challenged, as we're well aware, and we're going to continue to work at that. But it's going to continue to be a challenge for the town as long as we are continuing to rely on reserve funds in each successive budget.
But that said, since we did our financial policies,
we have built our reserve position.
right?
And we have
been able
added.
to- We have been able to follow the policy.
We have, yes, fiscal 19. Again, this is looking at fiscal 17 data. A lot has changed since then. We've been very aggressive with our financial management. Fiscal 19 implemented a budget that adhered to our guidelines on the use of free cash in the operating budget, being limited to a max of 50%. We used 0 stabilization funds in the fiscal 19 operating budget for the first time in years. That was another success. The 19 budget itself was a reduction of almost $1 million in reserve spending from fiscal 16, which is quite a bit of progress. That also reflects cutting $1 million in revenue when we're already struggling with state aid stagnating and things like that. So we've really, really aggressively worked to reduce the size of that structural deficit while kind of rubbing your hair and patting your belly, whatever that saying is, while building up the stabilization account. So this is meant to just kind of be a neutral presentation of the data. But yes, we have worked very hard, as have the schools and all the departments, to keep budgets extremely lean, as this is reflecting, so that we can try to whittle away at that structural deficit and build our reserves.
Questions?
So just a couple
Do
things.
you have questions?
I do. I'm ready to go for a while. Does anybody want to go first with some thoughts? All right,
We're ready at
I'll dive right in. I guess just a couple things. I've seen this before. It's been presented as well at the budget subcommittee, and I just think there's a tremendous amount of information to be gleaned from it that's very important. First off, very well put together, Connor. If you could, would you mind sharing this with us, this presentation that you gave?
Sure.
Just to have it, that would be helpful. If I was incorrect in my math, but I believe the aggregate of the impacts, and we gave them in pieces, but we talked about how if we spent to our peers amongst the different components like education, fire, police, so on and so forth, I believe that aggregates to 5.4 million. Is that a fair estimate? If somebody wants to check my math real quick, but I went through and looked, and I just think that's a tremendous amount of dollar amount, right, in terms of need. Not only are they big to each of the pieces, but it's big overall in aggregate. And I want to lead with something. There's nothing wrong inherently to run lean or to be efficient as either an organization or as a business or as a town compared to other people. Somebody has to run the most efficient and the most lean. But I do want to point out that we run the most efficient and the most lean. It seems like in aggregate across the board, I shouldn't say most, we're low in the group in terms of our total spend. We seem to be at the bottom of most of these critical components. And I take that and I compare that against the fact that we have a structural revenue challenge. And so from a budgeting standpoint, if you have a structural revenue challenge, but you may have a little bit more on the expense side, that gives you some wiggle room in case something goes wrong, if that makes sense, right? But if you have a challenged revenue environment and you already run incredible lean, then your margin for error in periods of downturn or in periods of duress or challenge is narrower. And I just think as a town, we need to acknowledge that. And I think that while we talk about that there are things being extremely lean and it's not likely to add improving services or programs, I do want to put forth the discussion of an opportunity cost, that there are some things that we may not be getting to on a structural basis. And I'm not saying there are or aren't, but if we are chronically running a lean budget, I just want to ask whether or not we as a community are investing in these particular pieces to the degree that it enables them to grow or it enables them to maintain the level of services. And I'll give the example of, we may not have to fix the roof immediately, so to speak, but eventually if the roof goes, a lot more underneath it goes. So I just want to make sure we consider how important it is on the revenue side of the equation to generate the necessary funds that we can reinvest into some of these departments. And I agree, Connor. I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with the departments or that we're not providing services, but I do want to begin to ask that question of are we perhaps not repairing things at the rate that we should? And therefore, as that time goes on, the cost of those repairs get bigger. And maybe they become capital repairs because we weren't able to get to the level of repairs. And so I guess I look at this presentation, and that was one of my takeaways, was it seems like there's an awful lot of funds that would be needed to get us back to the average of our peer group in terms of expenses, and that we do that in most of these key areas. Those are the key thoughts.
It also impacts the risk. I mean, if you look at the things that you can just say off the top of your head, the building deferred maintenance, about $80 million.
Right.
The roads, the road conditions, the amount of money that, what did he say, $1.8 million we would need to be able to
For our roadways.
get all our roadways
Something
back,
in
so-
that area.
Bless you.
And Public Works is a good example because they do so much kind of hard asset management.
Right.
And not to sound alarmist, but I hope I'm not giving conflicting messages. There are absolutely opportunity costs for running this lean. A good example is a plumber. We do not have a plumber. We have a buildings and ground staff of 5 that maintain all school and ground buildings. We don't have a plumber. There is plumbing work that needs to be done. You could look at a direct cost comparison and say, like we have an electrician on staff, that if we had contracted that service out under procurement law and paid prevailing wage, if you looked at the hours our electrician worked, it would have cost 250% more to contract that out. However, that's not to say we were spending 250 and then we brought it in-house. All that means is that without that electrician there, then a lot of that work doesn't get done.
Right.
And you do emergency repairs, right? Which is not, to your analogy, there's a certain amount of time where you can float a repair, but as Dave Field, I think, is excellently equipped to explain and has very recently with a road management program, there's a cost, a real one. A repair deferred is a more expensive repair down the road. So I do think I'm very proud of how tight our departments run their budgets, but there is absolutely an opportunity cost. I think another maybe non-concrete, no pun intended, example that we have seen in recent years is Police Chief Sullivan has been very clear what a big priority it has been for him since becoming chief to grow the number of officers so that we could have 2 full-time school resource officers. We have not had the funding to do that. And that has been a challenging conversation. We've been able to work out a shared resource officer program, which is, I think, working pretty well. And I commend the schools and the police for working through that. But that is another area where there is a programmatic need the chief is aware of, and he is requesting that we just don't necessarily have the recurring funding for. This office is another good example. Our Office of the Selectmen includes human resources, it includes procurement, finance, all labor relations, contracts. We have 4 staff. The audit years ago identified that the average of communities of Easton size for those operations between 4.5 to 6 full-time staff. When that happened, we had 3. So we're at 4, which is an improvement, but there's work that we would like to pay more attention to, frankly, that we can't always necessarily get to. So there are opportunity costs to running lean.
And also, you know, people say you should run government like a business. Every business that I've ever been involved with has a business continuity plan, so that when something happens, there is something to follow for that. And when we run departments so lean, where there's only, you know, we have a lot of one-person departments, you know, we were very lucky to have an assistant town administrator when we just had the change in management of the town, because if we didn't have that position for a long time, and if we didn't have it then, it wouldn't have been, I mean, you know, the transition would have been a real challenge.
Absolutely.
So it's important to have some of those positions so that if something changes, the town doesn't, you know, stumble. And, you know, a lot of this stuff, it's run very efficiently, but anything could trigger that to change.
No doubt. And I just want to acknowledge one last point, and that is that Easton certainly faces some unique challenges compared to its surrounding communities and its core group. You know, as we talk about the spend levels being challenged, I couldn't help but notice in the Table 1 appendix that we have that our average single-family tax bill happens to be the 9th highest out of 13. So, you know, we have the largest amount of land area, I believe, in this entire group, according to that community comparison survey that, according to the separate supporting document that Connor mentioned he put together for some surrounding communities, and it may not be the exact group of communities.
It is the same group.
It is,
Yes.
and we have the largest amount of land. And I believe it's true, and we're going to check on this, but how much of that land is actually tax generating compared to fellow communities, I believe is going to be a very different story. And we have the 4th largest amount of mileage that needs, road miles that needs to be maintained. So here we are with a challenge in terms of, I believe, investing and supporting town services and school education to the degree that helps the community continue to be leaders in our, I guess in our area or in our comparison group, but yet we also have to acknowledge that we have a tax base that may have characteristics that they're already 9th out of 13. So, you know, when we talk about new growth and we talk about the structural revenue deficit that sometimes becomes white noise because we've said it so long, but to me, it's critical that we begin to address that side of the equation, because I'm concerned on the expense side that we have done such a great job. That risk that you spoke of is becoming more realistic more years that go by. So I think that's a key point to bring out of some of the characteristics that the town of Easton has inherently.
Anybody else? Craig?
I think Tom took it.
Chuck?
I'm good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. That was a good report.
And so the report itself is online. We'll get the PowerPoint put online as well. And if you'd like, I could email a copy of it to you or the full board.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
And it's public, so if we get asked, we can share it, right?
Absolutely.
He just said it's
I'll
gonna
put it
be on the
online. I'll just
website.
send a link right to you.
Excellent.
I should have mentioned this in all of my attempt to thread all these items and presentations together. Every report that we do publicly, every budget message that's sent out internally, usually within a day or two, we put everything online. We kind of pride ourselves on that. It's public information. We want the public to be able to get it. So if you go to the town's website and go to town financial information, there's a fiscal 20 budget page. Everything that we've talked about in the past month and a half is put up with a timestamp of when it was uploaded, what it is, and people can get access to that there.
Yeah, when I read this just a couple of days ago, I was aghast at what I saw, and I think that you, Connor, with this presentation and your reference to opportunity costs, and so many of Tom's words were helpful, and speaking of the structural revenue deficit, and I think that those two issues are really key to this presentation.
So if you have no further
Right
questions.
into the budget?
Sure. I was not planning on giving the presentation again unless you prefer I do. It's up to the board. I could. We did do that together. I did present the full presentation to Finance Committee a couple nights later, so that should have been taped, but I'm happy to kind of just very quickly flip through it, whatever your preference is.
So you wanted to just go into the discussion, or can you call it up and just go through the highlights of it? We don't have to go into it in as much depth because we did do that before. But
Sure.
although I do like that image.
Agreed.
It's a stock image. Okay, so I will not go back through this slide. Overview for fiscal 20. So we just spent a lot of time talking about the most recently available spending data from the DOR. That's fiscal 17. We're looking forward. It's going to be fiscal year 2020, effective this July. This budget message is available online. The board has a copy of it. Fiscal year 20 is going to be another challenging year for the town. Structural revenue deficit persists, and that's something that we have to continually work with each year. We have some unique challenges this year on the revenue side. One is that historically positive growth factors such as local receipts, that's stuff like excise tax, building permits, ambulance receipts, that is looking like it's going to level off. That's an area that has grown quite significantly as a percentage in recent years. We've highlighted it as a bright spot while also cautioning that eventually it would calm down. So we're looking at that, which will further challenge the revenue picture. We're currently projecting for fiscal 20 another budget that fully adheres to those management guidelines as far as the use of free cash. That again presents a revenue challenge because the certified free cash available has dropped. It was 2.4 million last budget, so that meant we could use 1.2 million. It's now just over 2 million, which means that if we stick to 50% utilization, we use 1 million. That's a reduction of $200,000 in available revenue. $200,000 in budgets this tight is meaningful. So that's the current projection now to adhere to those guidelines. That would be the lowest amount of reserve use, I think, in well over a decade. Preliminary departmental budgets fund only level services with a single exception. The police department preliminary budget does currently include a 38th officer. That is not something we're sure will be able to stay because we currently are projecting a $1.9 million deficit. Any other departmental cost changes are largely driven by contractual obligations and fixed cost growth. So currently looking at a $1.9 million deficit that we're projecting. That is not out of the ordinary. We've seen deficit projections about that size at this point of a process before, and we can and will and have no option but to eliminate that before getting to town meeting in May.
And when we don't have the governor's budget yet, and we don't have the insurance
Sure. So
numbers
yeah, there's
yet, there's still a lot of
there's a lot of stuff up in the air. Major items. So we have the governor's proposal for fiscal 20 for the state budget, and I'll just kind of skip to that. And that is, again, kind of projecting another challenging year for the town. The preliminary fiscal 20 budget for the Commonwealth is projecting a really marginal increase in state aid to the town of Easton of 1.3%. It's just under $170,000. It's going to be a total revenue projection of $12.9 million. Again, that's based on the governor's 2020 budget. However, that marginal increase is itself entirely eliminated. We, in addition to getting a revenue assessment from the state, we also get a assessment that we pay to state and county government. And our assessment at this early stage is projected to increase by $360,000, which, as it currently stands, we're looking at a net decrease of state revenue to Easton of $192,000. So we're looking at a cut of reserve spending in the area of almost $200,000. We're looking at a net cut in state revenue of almost $200,000. And that leaves local receipts, which has largely leveled off, and taxation, which is capped in its growth.
And they're looking at, taking a look at the foundation budget for the school, for the education system, and any changes to that, that could actually mean that we lose money in Easton. It's not likely that it's gonna bring us any benefit, so we have to watch out for that and see what the impact of that's gonna be.
That's right. That's right. And education funding is the largest portion of state revenue. It's called Chapter 70 revenue on our budget. It makes up a very, very large majority of our total state revenue to the town. So any kind of shift one way or another is very, very, very meaningful. So we'll keep an eye on that. As I alluded to, this budget is currently projecting an adherence to those financial management guidelines as it pertains to reserve use spending. That does result in a decrease of reserve use of about $200,000. This is a graph that I show a lot when we're talking about reserve use in the operating budget. This is, I think, my best shake at a visual representation of what a structural revenue deficit actually looks like. To Tom's point, we say it so much it kind of turns into white noise. This is a stacked chart showing, starting all the way back to 2007, which was the last time there was an override, and thankfully a significant amount of that went to our stabilization fund right before the Great Recession, shows our use of free cash and reserves in every year's operating budget, which very quickly after the recession, there were cuts to state aid, which is our second largest source of revenue. The town leaned on reserve funds to fill that structural gap created by those cuts. And since then has been using over $1 million per year and peaking at over $2 million in fiscal 16 in these reserve funds to fill that structural revenue hole. The proposed 2020 budget is just over $1 million, which would be the lowest reserve use in over a decade. And that's the lowest reserve use in actual dollars, but as a percentage of a budget, that's a huge, huge change from where we've been. And again, even the current budget that we're working with today in fiscal 19 is a reduction of almost $1 million in reserve spending from 3 years ago. So we've been working really, really hard to try to curb that. On the expense side, to Tom's point, we've worked within the margins aggressively to reduce spending where we can. We've had success in a few major areas. We moved our insurance for employees and retirees into the GIC a few years back. That saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in that year. But since then, the long-term annual average of premium increases is averaging just over 1% for the town, which is a big win. That's huge. That's quite controlled growth. To Dottie's point, there are other factors for 2020 that remain outstanding, one of which is what the health rates for fiscal 20 will be. Those are set by the GIC. We have the aggregate increase, that's at 3.3%. We budgeted a 5% increase because we're very conservative at this point in the process. We are very tepid in our revenue assumptions on things that fluctuate, and we are conservative and assume large increases in fixed costs that we don't have information on yet because as much as we might not want to see a $1.9 million deficit at this point, we'd rather start from there and reduce it as information becomes available than have the inverse. Mm-hmm. So we'll be looking to get those rates shortly from the GIC. We've been a leader in solar. We generate a significant amount of net metering credits in town, which help reduce our energy expenditure, and we've renegotiated a lot of wage scales so that the growth of salaries have moved in a lot of unions from 4% performance steps to 2% steps, which is much more sustainable. The current round of collective bargaining agreements that have been ratified by the board for the town, the 5 of them, 4 of them took a 0 base wage increase this year. And overall, they were all more conservative on COLAs than what we've seen before. So we're working really aggressively, and our labor groups are working with us to try and control those wage growth patterns. Town department increases are largely contractual. As I mentioned, they're projected to increase by 3.3% to 17, this is all town departments, so not general government. This is general government, police, fire, DPW. That's projected to go up to 17,583,000 in fiscal 20. The Easton School Department has its own concurrent budget process that unfolds alongside ours. This is a placeholder that we've plugged in for budgeting purposes. We do not have a preliminary budget assessment from the schools yet. We'll continue to work with them, but so for now we are keeping a 4% placeholder in there. And we will refine that through the process as we always do. And funds available for appropriation for those departments are really constrained by increases in fixed costs. Fixed costs are costs which are difficult to contain and over which we have little to no immediate control in a given year. These include things like debt service for our payment on borrowing for capital expenditures, employee health insurance, which I just touched on briefly, our liability and workers' comp insurance, snow and ice deficit, our retirement assessment, and a regional school assessment. A lot of these are estimates right now. Particularly employee health insurance is impactful. That will be refined. Our property and liability insurance will be refined. Snow and ice deficit doesn't currently exist. I'm probably jinxing us by saying that, but we plugged in and assumed $200,000 deficit there. The snow and ice budget is performing relatively well right now. Obviously, we know better in New England than to assume that winter's over when we get to March. So we'll see where that goes. Retirement assessment is that is reflective of an early payment discount. That is an assessment to Bristol County Retirement as they march towards full funding in fiscal 28. Regional school assessment, again, the regional schools, much like Easton Public Schools, have their own concurrent budget process that they're working on. That is a placeholder. That is not a number that they have assessed to us, but it is reflective of increases we have seen in the Southeastern Regional School budget in recent years that has been in part driven by increased enrollment to the schools. So,
But we also have charter schools in that too, right?
charter schools are not
That's part of
reflected.
the cherry sheet?
That's part of a cherry sheet, which is listed in the budget. One moment. On the expense budget, you will see that in other expenditures, county and state assessments is where those charter school assessments would come from, and that was briefly touched on the state assessments that we're projecting to see an increase of 300,000. I think the state. Right, that's why we have a net decrease. So if you look at that expense category in fiscal 19, our county and state assessments were 835,000 and change. And based on the governor's budget, that's going to go up to just shy of 1.2 million, which is an increase of 43%. So we'll keep an eye on that. The swing in the charter school assessment is very significant. So we'll reach out to our partners at the state to determine why that budget has moved so significantly and see how that gets refined as it moves through its process with the state.
Any questions? Did we get them all?
I would just make some observations about some of the key things that I heard. One of the things is that several of our unions in negotiations took 0% increases in this year. And I just think that's indicative of the fact that we ask critically important people to join us on this challenging journey, and therefore they're taking less at the start. A, it's appreciated, but B, I think it's indicative as any of us that manage people, we understand what we're asking of employees or people that work when they have that happen to them. And I think that's a challenge. I heard things about risk. I heard things about Chapter 70 funds, that if it's a reformulation, we could be at risk. And again, I'm not trying to be alarmist, but this is what I heard in the presentation. State aid was a net deduct, not going up. So I understand the presentation fully, the mathematical requirement of us to ensure that we can pay for the expenses that we have. We have to build our budgets from the expense side because we don't have extra revenue. And I guess I would just highlight once again that we forego the opportunity to have conversations about what it would take in terms of how to be proactive or strategic, because we have the opportunity and the funding to do so. And how do we continue to increase and improve and support town services and school education? And, you know, we I understand the presentation. It's the one we should be giving, the one we have to give. It's the reality that we face. I just would encourage us, and I would encourage people in the community to recognize it's important at some point for us to have that discussion about what are we foregoing by not having either proactive or strategic discussions, to use words that the school department, I think, so appropriately put forth last year. And that's one of my takeaways, is that we didn't have those conversations about those aspects. So that's just kind of what I would add.
Great.
Senator,
Thank you.
here's a brief summary of the bottom line of each of these revenue and expense categories that currently put us at the $1.9 million deficit. So again, we certainly have our challenges, to Tom's point, and we're going to work with the departments and everyone else involved to refine that budget and produce a balanced one for town meeting. The board, we're currently working on scheduling the departmental budget presentations. Those will take place currently looking at March 25th and 27th.
Connor, what were the other sources on the revenue side that went down by 9%?
That is reflective of our reduction in reserve funding. So we treat reserves would show up on the revenue side of the ledger, and because we are proposing to cut free cash use again, that results in bringing the other revenue sources down by that 9%. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, the delta in that category is entirely, with the exception of $200, attributable to that cut of specifically $155,809 is the decrease in reserve fund use. So that's where you see the negative 9% there.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And this
thanks, Connor.
also,
Well done, Connor.
not to be too repetitive, but this will be online in the financial section of the website.
Correct.
All right. So public participation, it's very quiet tonight. Town administrator notes, do you or Michael have anything?
No, not at this time. I've spoken enough.
Any other selectmen have any selectmen notes or comments? I will just mention that, and I'm going to try to get the dates right this time, so I pulled it up. For the Community Visioning Forum for the building project in Easton, there's going to be an update on the progress of the project, the feedback on work done to date, input into the design development, address any questions, and outline the next steps. So there's 2 meetings coming up. The first one is on March 6th from 6:30 to 8:30 at the Richardson Olmsted Cafeteria. The second one is April 11th, 6:30 to 8:30 at Oliver Ames High School Cafeteria. So I'd really encourage people to please come out to that, learn more about the school, ask lots of questions. A lot of work has gone into this so far, so people should have lots of questions about it, and I hope we get a good turnout at both of those days.
Critical project for the town, no doubt about it.
And the next thing I was asked to mention is this is a big week for the Lions Club. It's their annual auction, which is March 3rd at Stonehill, the live auction. And online, there's online bidding from February 17th through March 1st, which is this Friday. There's lots of great items on there. You can go to www.eastonlions.org, and all the proceeds go towards iResearch. So it's their biggest fundraiser of the year, and they have asked me to say that they appreciate all the support that they get from the community, and it allows them to do a lot of good things in the community. So best of luck to the Lions for a successful event on Sunday.
Absolutely.
And with that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
I'm
Press
sorry,
notes?
we have a press
Oh.
notes and an executive session.
We are doing the executive session? Okay, I am sorry about that. Donna, did you have any press notes? Okay, so
It would be
not to return?
not to return.
So we do have an executive session under Purpose 3 of Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation if an open meeting may have detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, to discuss litigation related to A.J. Virgilio Construction and litigation relating to non-union personnel, Timothy Griffin, not to return to open session. So take a first, a second, and a roll call vote.
So moved.
King, yes?
Broussard, yes.
Barger, yes.
Full Janetti, yes. Thank you.